Good evening and welcome. My name is Melanie Stambaugh, and I am honored to be here with you tonight for Washington Policy Center's first ever statewide virtual annual dinner. While we might be physically separated, we are united by our commitment to free markets and the freedoms that come with them. We know that with free markets come opportunity, better jobs, better, well, everything. Markets tear down barriers, and it is free markets that provide incentives for all of us to interact with each other. Markets are among the strongest positive forces, providing the social glue that holds us together and binds us as a community, a state, and a nation. So yes, tonight we are in separate locations, but we all want to get to the same place, a Washington state with renewed commitment to markets and market-based solutions. I am proud to be here again with Washington Policy Center and the thousands of you who have tuned in tonight, as well as with our distinguished keynote speakers, former Congressman and prosecutor Trey Gowdy, and acclaimed historian and best-selling author Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. Now, those of you joining us for the first time should know that Washington Policy Center's annual dinner events, both in Eastern and Western Washington, have attracted top national speakers for the past 2 decades, raised nearly $2 million in revenue annually, and have grown to become among the largest events of their kind in the nation. This year, for the first time, we have come together for a single statewide event. Now, as always, a significant portion of Washington Policy Center's budget is raised by these events, and tonight is no exception. So, not only will tonight be a spectacular night of insights and commentary, but the future defense of free markets and market reform advocacy in Washington state rides on it. I would like to take a moment to thank our top sponsors this evening. Without their generous support, this event would not be so successful, and Washington Policy Center's work across our state would not be possible. So I want to thank Jim and CK Coles, the Schlepper Family Foundation, Mike and Judy Trimbrell, TR Wines, Waters Winery, Flying Trout, Taro Estates, Rick and Nancy Alvord, the Bellevue Collection, Petter Properties, CM Pigott, Silver Cloud Inns and Hotels. I'd also like to thank Carol and Spike Anderson, Brown Bear Car Wash, the Bruce R. McCaw Family Foundation, the Building Industry Association of Washington, Kent Clausen, John and Kathy Connors, Patricia Edwards, a special thank you to Bill and Meredith Ferris, Quinn, Mike and Chris Quinn, Sarah and John Rinlob, Washington Trust Bank, and Wells Fargo. We have many more sponsors that you can see on your screen, and a complete list of our sponsors, as well as tonight's full agenda, can be found on our virtual program at WPCDinner.com. Now, several years ago, I served as an intern for Washington Policy Center. I then took what I learned and headed to the state capitol, where I was a state representative. I can assure you that Washington Policy Center is an essential resource for policy ideas and insights. It serves as both an incubator for free market reform proposals and as a watchdog against government overreach. As you will hear tonight, Washington Policy Center is notably effective, despite being based in a state immersed in so-called progressive ideology. Now, before tonight's program begins, I would like you to stand with me wherever you are as Craig Meidel, Spokane's Chief of Police and the President of the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance. This will be followed by our national anthem, sung by Ethnic Chamber of Commerce Coalition and Washington Policy Center board member, Martha Lee.
I'm Craig Meidel, Chief of Police for the Spokane Police Department. I want to start by thanking all of you who have supported us during this very challenging time. I speak on behalf of all law enforcement when I say your support for us has never been more appreciated and needed than it is right now. Will you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, was so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does the star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Chief Meidel. We appreciate what you do to protect our communities. And Martha, that was amazing. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you. For every Washington Policy Center annual dinner event, the Washington Policy Center board and staff select a distinguished individual or group of individuals to receive the Champion of Freedom Award. Here to name and recognize the 2020 recipients is Washington Policy Center President Dan Meade-Smith.
Every year, Washington Policy Center's board and staff nominate and select a member of the community to receive our Champion of Freedom Award. The award recognizes those who have devoted their lives to public service, achievement, and expanding opportunity. Past recipients include Admiral Tom Hayward, General James Mattis, the Rainier Scholars Program, Charles Pigott, Jennifer Dunn, Bruce McCaw, and the Ackerley family, to name a few. Each year, we have honored these recipients and many more at our annual dinner events in Spokane and Bellevue. This year, Kemper Freeman Jr. and George Nethercutt Jr. were named the 2020 Champions of Freedom. It's hard to imagine Bellevue without Kemper Freeman. He has not only transformed Bellevue's character and culture, but his service as a state legislator, his leadership on transportation issues, focusing on reducing congestion, and his work with numerous nonprofit organizations help make our region among the best places to live. George Nethercutt's historic career in public service is nationally recognized, with legislative accomplishments in trade, defense technologies, and modern agriculture. After leaving Congress, he continued that distinguished career in service with his work in civics education efforts that continue today through the George Nethercutt Foundation. Both of these gentlemen have served on our board of directors, and we are a better organization for it. We let them know that while they are this year's official champions of freedom, we plan on formally honoring them with the award next year, when we can give them the applause and in-person recognition they deserve. Congratulations to both of these outstanding leaders. We look forward to celebrating with you in person soon.
Congratulations, Kemper and George. Your accomplishments are truly inspiring. We look forward to honoring you both next year. Speaking of which, be sure to stay until the end of the event when we will announce some exciting news about next year's annual dinners. We now turn to our first keynote speaker of the evening, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. Dr. Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, a distinguished visiting fellow in history at Hillsdale College, and was a visiting professor of military history at the U.S. Naval Academy. He is the author of hundreds of columns and essays and has written or edited 24 books. He is a regular contributor to National Review and a syndicated columnist and frequent commentator on cable news. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This said that the 2020 election will be the most significant, pivotal in American history. I don't know if that's true or not. 1860 or even 1980 seem pretty important to me, but I do think it'll be the most bizarre, strangest, and crazy election we ever have for a variety of reasons. One, of course, is the virus. We've never had a virtual campaign where candidates either wore masks or campaigned in seclusion. Never had a candidate that was 77 years old like Joe Biden. We've never had a candidate who had a deliberate strategy like Biden to sort of remain in situ in his basement and run a virtual 19th century campaign in the way that candidates used to electioneer from their front porch. But it was a pretty good strategy for a while. And by that I mean there were four central issues in the early part of this campaign. And they had a Katrina-like effect on the commander-in-chief, because whoever is president is either blamed or praised for the news cycle of the day. We had the first, of course, was the coronavirus. Nobody in their right mind originally thought that 200,000 Americans would die, and yet they have. And although you could make the argument that Biden hasn't offered a superior protocol than did Trump, or that Trump has done better than many European countries like Spain or Belgium, depending on the analytics you use, or Italy. Nonetheless, he was blamed in the public imagination. And Biden kind of brilliantly ran Trump against the virus, not Trump against Biden. The same was true with the recession that came from the lockdown. Trump versus the recession, not Trump versus Biden. Every president takes credit or blame for the recession or the recovery no matter what. There was a lockdown. People had never, in the history of the United States, been quarantined in a national sense. That hurt Trump as well. And finally, there was the late May death of George Floyd while in the custody of Minneapolis police. You added all that together, and Trump's favorability was down to 41 or 40 in many of the aggregate polls. In a head-to-head contest with Biden, he was down 10 to 11 points by early June. It made sense then, given Biden's supposed cognitive challenges, to just stay where he was and let the news cycle run against Trump. And then something happened, as always happens when you play fourth quarter football and you try to stay on a lead without increasing it. And what happened was the news cycle obviously changed. And now the virus seems to be waning. The CDC released the information today that people under the age of 69 have a 99% survivability rate from if infected. And with new therapies and a vaccination on the horizon, people are starting to recalibrate a little bit and give Trump more credit than blame. That's changing. So is the lockdown. It's been redefined not just as sitting in your apartment, but given 99.8% of those under 20 do not have serious symptoms from the virus, why are 50 million people, 50 million of our children, locked out of the schools? And that's an issue that favors Trump because he's an advocate of opening up the economy again. Third, it does look now like it's more likely we're going to have a recovery from this recession rather than go into depression, as was feared. So every bit of economic news helps the president. We've had a lot better economic news than we did April, May, and June. And then finally, whatever position on the tragedy of George Floyd, the culpability of the Minneapolis police officers, what has been happening in Kenosha or Portland or Rochester doesn't seem to have a direct connection. The visuals, the optics that people across America are seeing are people overturning tables, accosting people while they're eating, burning down police stations, storming courts, insulting African American policemen, and it's not working well for Biden. So the news cycle is starting to alter, and that has profound implications on the election. All of a sudden, Joe Biden will have to go out as he's tried last week. The problem he's facing is if you haven't gone out, your campaign is like a muscle that hasn't been exercised. So Biden has basically campaigned through scripted interviews, teleprompted responses, preset questions, and he hasn't had that give and take that Trump has been having at rallies, at impromptu news conferences, at formal question and answers, at hostile press, and he's sluggish. And yet he's going to have to come out more and more because the news cycle no longer will carry him. And I think those issues have flipped and they're not going to change radically. In other words, I don't think we're going to have a third spike in the virus. I don't think we're going to have a very bad or worse jobs report. I don't think the economy is going to go into a nosedive. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people arguing that the lockdown was brilliant and we need to extend it all the way into 2021. And finally, I don't think that mass numbers of people concerned about racial justice are going to join the Antifa and BLM mob and see if they can transmogrify the violence once again into a peaceful protest. It's just not going to happen. And that's going to favor Trump. So besides those issues, there's 3 or 4 more that will adjudicate what we can expect in November. The first, of course, is the debates. For all the talk of Nancy Pelosi that we should cancel them, or Tom Friedman, we should put limitations upon them, or we should have them by Zoom or Skype, or another Biden supporter suggested we need an instant fact checker, maybe reminiscent of Candy Crawley in the 2012 debate where she sort of hijacked it from Mitt Romney. There probably will be a debate, at least one, I think. There's scheduled 3. And if you go back and look at Joe Biden's debate performance as vice presidential candidate in 2008 against Sarah Palin, against 2012, against the technocrat and numbers guy Paul Ryan, and of course the socialist zealot Bernie Sanders in this campaign cycle, he didn't do too bad. If you were looking at a transcript, he lost. But if you look at the optics, it was good old Joe from Scranton who smiled and said, come on, here's the deal, number 1, number 2. And he got through it okay. So I think Trump should be very careful not to underestimate. People have moments of clarity that are supposedly cognitive challenge. But otherwise, I think Trump has the advantage in these debates to come, but he has to be very careful. There's a second round of issues, and that's, I guess, what Donald Rumsfeld called in the sphere of foreign affairs, the known unknowns. I don't think anybody thought Ruth Bader Ginsburg would die suddenly. Everybody knew she was elderly and ill, but she seemed to be hale and had a superhuman ability to overcome disease and challenges. And yet here we are looking at a very controversial Supreme Court nomination. And I think in this case, if the Republicans do this right, and that is they've nominated Amy Barrett. Seems like tonight officially we'll know whether that's true or not tomorrow. I think Lindsey Graham will probably have a 3 to 4 day quick rapid hearing, and they'll have a vote in the fashion that they've had within 40 days in past nominations, and she will be nominated. I think they'll win the argument that whatever the Biden rule is or the McConnell rule, there's only one rule, and that's the Constitution. And the Constitution says the President nominates, the Senate advises, and consent. Consent is defined by confirmation. You can have or not have hearings. We usually do in the modern period. And she will be nominated, she will have a hearing, and she will be confirmed. And the Democrats will get angry, but of course, the only controversy about this process is in any given year of any presidency, when that president does not control the Senate, then there's going to be controversy if you're in a polarized climate like today. So I think then the question is, who wins from that hearing that we're going to see very quickly? The Democrats think they won the Kavanaugh hearing. That's why they took back the House. I don't think that's true, but that was their argument. They energized the base. The Republicans thought that they made such a spectacle of themselves and such underhanded tactics that was why they kept the Senate. In fact, they picked up 2 seats. Lindsey Graham's greatest moment in his senatorial career was that, I think it was October 27th, that outburst. And he said, it was sort of like Mr. Welch's against McCarthyism, have you no decency? I voted for all of your moderate candidates, and here you guys do this. So that was a pivotal moment, and he's in a tough re-election. He may have another one, and this may energize the Trump basis. But it's an issue that will have a lot of import. There's also, under this category of known unknowns, I guess we would call them October surprises, bombshells. It seems like every 3 to 5 days, almost like dominoes falling, we hear a new psychodrama, a melodrama. I guess 2 weeks ago, all of a sudden we were told that Donald Trump did not object that Vladimir Putin had put bounties on American soldiers in Afghanistan. Oh my God, our president is in league with the Russians again. And that took about 4 days out of the news cycle to find the evidence and suppress that lie. It was untrue. But no sooner had I done that than the next domino that was waiting in turn said, wait a minute, all the post office boxes in America are disappearing off the street. Trump is trying to weaponize the postal office to stop mail-in balloting. That took 2 or 3 days out to marshal the evidence and discredit it. No sooner did that, then there was an old story from 2018 that was resurrected, reflated, and we learned that Donald Trump did not want to fly because it was too rainy and would get his hair wet to a cemetery in France, and he called the honored dead suckers and losers. Well, that took about 3 or 4 days to discredit that Jeffrey Goldberg unsourced smear, and he got 11, 12, I think eventually 17 people. He got the weather report, and it was proven to be another lie. No sooner had he done that than Bob Woodward had been waiting impatiently in the wings. They pulled apart the curtain. He came forth and said, oh my gosh, did you know that Trump didn't take COVID seriously? He laughed, all that stuff. And those surprises will continue. The question is, do they have anything more than that? Because it's been going on for 4 years, and it's starting to achieve the same effect as vaccination. Each time you get a little dose of a toxin and you survive it, it gives you greater immunity. And I think that's happening with Trump. And Trump, as president, has a lot of latitude to have an October surprise. Again, the nomination of Amy Barrett was absolutely brilliant, because this is not going to be a wealthy prep kid, and I say that with all due respect to Justice Kavanaugh, but I'm referring to him when he was a teenager. This is going to be a mom of 5, an adopted mother of 2 children, one special needs, another from Haiti, happily married, beautiful, charismatic, and it's going to be very hard for the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee to tear this woman's character apart. And if they try that, I think they'll have a much more surprising effect than they did with Kavanaugh. But that's an October surprise. And Trump had something to do with that. Another is this breakthrough in the Middle East. People can say, as Biden did, that it's partly because of what we did. We took credit. He took credit for the outreach with the United Arab Emirates to Israel and the Kosovo deal and all of that stuff. And he was right in one sense, that the Obama administration ostracizing Israel and the moderate Arab regimes and coming up with this unhinged idea that Iran, from Tehran to the Mediterranean, would have a new Persian Shia crescent, and that would balance. Our old enemy would be our friend. Therefore, with the nuclear deal, they would kind of scare the enemy, but they wouldn't get a nuclear weapon, kind of, sort of, at least for 10 or 15 years. And then Israel couldn't quite leverage us, et cetera, et cetera. That is completely blown up now. But it did allow Trump some latitude to say to the Arabs, the enemy of your enemy is your friend, and Israel and vice versa. So we could see more development there. What if Saudi Arabia in 2 weeks decided to, I don't think they will, but they could recognize Israel? That would be the greatest coup in the Middle East since the end of World War II. And that would have a profound effect on the election. There's a couple of other things to keep in mind, and that is these are two very controversial, as you know, presidential candidates. I think it would be, in different ways, each of them is capable of saying anything at any time, anywhere, to anyone. And we saw the other day when asked about the election, would he concede, Trump sort of resonated what Hillary Clinton said. She said, under no circumstances should Joe Biden concede. He didn't quite say that, but he said, essentially, he qualified it in a way presidents are technically not supposed to do. If it's fair, but if it's et cetera. And that was translated into a bad day of media exposure, and it hurt him, even though that was not his intent. By the same token, if Joe Biden, who I think you could make the argument without being too cruel, is not fully cognitive all the time, were to say again, you ain't black, or he were to say to a black journalist, would I call you, how would you like it if I called you a cokehead or a junkie, or he went back to a corn pop story, or you put you all in chains, or any of those, or if he were to have another press conference when, I'm not talking with a teleprompter, but if you saw this over here, you might think I was. Or if I started to tell you right now, the teleprompt, or can you bring that closer, that would kind of ruin this presentation that I'm trying to give. So the point is that each of them could have an outburst or a moment that would affect the election. And that's something to keep in mind. I'd like to finish, though, with some type of prediction, but couched in history. In 2016, we were told that Hillary Clinton was a mainstream, and she said she was, I don't think she was, but she was a mainstream Democrat. She united the party. She had tons of state experience in government and elected office. We had known her for the last 30 years. The blue wall was pretty much solid. Donald Trump was a novice. He shot from the hip. He didn't understand sophisticated analytics. He polarized people. And proof of his sure loss were traditional polls, the Wall Street Journal, the NBC poll, the Reuters poll, the Political poll, the Quinnipiac poll. All of them showed him in individual states down anywhere from 10 to 2, and the national level down 2 to 3 or even larger. And we were basically, if we read the New York Times the night before the election, we were told Donald Trump had a 7% or a 14%. I like the Nate Silver prediction that got him in trouble with the left. He said he had 28% chance of winning. And that was all blown away. Now we are here 4 years later, and we were told this can't happen. History never repeats itself, except, as Mark said, as farce. So we have to think that away. And guess what? Donald Trump, just like in 2016, restless, never sleeping, is barnstorming the Middle West, the purple states, the swing states. Joe Biden playing the role of Hillary Clinton, has rumors swarming around him about his health and physical ability to match Trump hour for hour in the campaign trail. Biden is secure that all of the traditional polls that show him ahead are proof that he is ahead. In other words, all the polls that were wrong in 2016 are right now, and all the polls that in 2016, whether it was Rasmussen Daily poll, or the Trafalgar State polls, or some of the Zogby and Emerson polls, they were right in 2016, but they just can't be right in 2020. And therefore, lightning can't strike again, and Biden will be the next president. We're already told that so sure the Democrats are that the first thing they're going to do when they take back the Senate on the Biden coattails is in the Senate filibuster. Number 2, pack the court. Number 3, lend credence to this state effort to end the Electoral College, find a way to bring in Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., et cetera, et cetera. And why everybody's looking at this, and the common conventional wisdom is it can't happen again. It's nothing like 2016. 2020, for all of the ups and downs in this roller coaster, is starting to mimic the same pulse and the same finale as we saw 4 years ago. And I'm reminded of a great quote of Prime Minister, Secretary of State, bureaucrat par excellence, Mr. Talleyrand, what he said of the Bourbons. Remember, he was a royalist, and then he was a revolutionary, and then he was a Napoleonic advocate, and then he went back to the Bourbons. And what he said about the Bourbon kings was, they've learned nothing and they've forgotten nothing. And so it is with 2020. We, being the nation and the Democratic Party in particular, has learned nothing and they've forgotten nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. Your insights, historical view, bringing it forward to our current day political landscape were very, very interesting. Thank you. Now, I think that we can all agree 2020 has been an unusual year, to say the least. We've endured a pandemic, an economic downturn, unprecedented government interventions, fires, unbreathable air, social isolation, and the year's not quite over yet. However, we are confident that all of these things will pass. But the true question is, what about the ideological current in our country? What about the increased American acceptance of socialism? President Reagan once quipped that the nearest thing to eternal life that we'll see on this earth is a government program. Imagine the breadth and the depth of the bureaucracies that we would see in a march toward American socialism. What you are about to see sets the stage for the current challenge that we face, but also the opportunity that we have when facing it.
Anyone can theorize about that, even if we're talking about Karl Marx or we're talking about the teenagers in America who don't have any idea what they're talking about.
You don't want to get sick back home because there's literally no resources to help you out. Like if you go to the hospital, sometimes they don't have power.
So it's not that you have money, you can buy anything. No, you need to have money and as well as the certain coupons for purchasing certain items. So that's in retrospect, that's under the what's so-called a planned economy.
When I was a kid growing up, before this government of Hugo Chavez took over, I would be riding my bike out on the street, playing with friends, playing soccer, playing baseball all day long. By the time I was in high school and my sister was a kid, it was too dangerous even for her to just go out and ride her bike.
There is so much control under socialism that they dictate where we live, they dictate our haircuts, they dictate where we go on holidays, they dictate where our kids go to school. They dictate every single aspect of our lives.
If people actually live your daily life in a communist or socialist society, you would have a different opinion toward socialism or communism.
The final straw that caused my family to decide to want to escape Romania was the fact that we were starving to death. It's as simple as that.
So you can literally lose everything, like me and my family. So not just 3 things, you can literally lose everything.
America is the largest economy in the world has been always the leader of the world. If America goes down, the whole world will go down.
If a country like Romania fails under socialism, we're talking about a country that has 23 million inhabitants. It's a small country. If America goes on this path of becoming socialism, when it will fail, the entire world will be affected. Because America is large enough to affect the economy of the entire world. And we're looking at a catastrophe of proportions that people cannot understand.
Washington Policy Center saw this challenge and launched Free Markets Destroy, a pro-market campaign using the concept of creative destruction to appeal to the younger generations. Free markets destroy disease, hunger, and bigotry. They are the revolutionary force for positive change. And this campaign has been seen more than 4 million times on social media accounts in Washington state. Our mission is to improve lives through free market solutions. Our 8 centers of research are relied on by lawmakers for policy innovations and insights. Media turn to us for key analysis and information. WPC has a growing track record of remarkable success in a hostile ideological environment. Washington Policy Center.
People on the streets was demanding socialism. They can go to North Korea, they can go to Cuba, Venezuela. Yeah, you're free to go.
Join us.
What a powerful message. And for all of the faults that we have within our system, what a reminder of how fortunate we are to live under a free market system with limited government and constitutionally protected rights. Now here, protecting some of those rights and advocating for free market solutions in Washington state is Washington Policy Center's incredible research team. I'd like you to please grab your glass and raise it and welcome Washington Policy Center's Vice President for Research, Paul Guppy, as he leads us in a toast for the remarkable accomplishments of Washington Policy Center and those ultimately responsible for those accomplishments, supporters like you.
I'm Paul Guppy, Vice President of Research at the Washington Policy Center. My job is to keep our flow of research steady, directed, and accurate. This is a task made easier by the talent of our WPC research staff. Their research is thorough and accurate. They are a tenacious and intellectually curious team, and I am proud to work with each of them. Everything WPC does, every victory we achieve, would be impossible if it were not for people like you. It is contributors like you who make our work possible.
Hello. Thanks to your support, the Center for Education was successful in getting equal funding for families who chose online public schools during the COVID lockdown, and in having bills based on our policy recommendations introduced during the 2020 legislative session to fund $15,000 school choice scholarships to private school for special needs and foster children, and $12,000 school choice scholarships for any other family who wants one.
After the $30 car tab initiative passed, the governor and Washington State Department of Transportation paused scores of transportation projects. Thanks to your support, WPC's Cole Center for Transportation uncovered that 70% of the paused projects were funded by the gas tax, not car tabs, revealing the political nature of the deferral list.
Some state lawmakers claimed that farmers do not pay state taxes. Thanks to your support, WPC's Initiative on Agriculture was able to create the state's first comprehensive study of agricultural taxes and determined that farmers in our state pay $1 billion in taxes every year.
Thanks to your support, the Center for Government Reform's work played a big role in defending Washington's competitive advantage of no income taxes. Our research and marketing efforts led to the legislature not adopting a capital gains income tax, and the state Supreme Court rejecting Seattle's efforts to use the courts to impose a graduated income tax across the state.
Thanks to your support, the Center for Small Business was able to successfully expose the fraud and mismanagement of the state's unemployment insurance program, expose its dangerous depletion of funds, and promote free market solutions that could have prevented the problems in the first place.
Thanks to your amazing support, we cultivated new allies. including Governor Inslee's former salmon advisor on the Snake River dams, the left-wing Columbia Legal Services to remove occupational license barriers for the poor, and an environmental group on the state's Wolf Advisory Committee. Thanks to these partnerships, we are more effective at protecting the Snake River dams, removing job-killing regulations, and helping ranchers deal with wolf recovery. We also showed that the left's low-carbon fuel standard was not only extremely expensive, but was a subsidy for the richest communities. Also, thanks to your amazing support, we are not only making a difference here in Washington State, but across the nation, with a piece in the Wall Street Journal highlighting the failure of Washington's response to COVID, including poor testing and restrictions that are unscientific. Our critiques were so effective, the governor abandoned his first COVID dashboard, and our analysis has been used by several reporters to ask questions and resulted in several news stories.
Because of your support, we engage a diverse and talented group of individuals aged 18 to 40 in policy plus action, as we work to not only understand key policy issues, but to act with impact. Because of you, our events bring young people to greater understandings of free market solutions for issues facing our communities and this great state of Washington.
In Eastern Washington, two of our biggest policy victories ever happened in the last year thanks to your support. Last fall, voters in Spokane approved requiring collective bargaining talks to be done in the public and a ban on a city income tax with over 70% support and majorities in every precinct of our state's second largest city. It's a remarkable showing for market policy approaches in a city trending leftward. Spokane's ban on a city income tax was followed by similar bans in the city of Spokane Valley and Granger, and other cities and counties are considering it as well. State legislators are now on notice that the people of our state do not want an income tax. It all started in Spokane thanks to your support of Washington Policy Center. For our final toast, I'd like to turn it over to WPC's chairman, Mark Pinkowski, who will speak on behalf of our healthcare and worker rights centers.
Thanks to your support, the Center for Healthcare made early reform recommendations to aid governments in reducing the impact of the COVID pandemic, strongly advocated that these reforms be made permanent, and published a study highlighting them. Also, thanks to you, Dr. Stark was able to publish and distribute a new book, Healthcare Policy Simplified, aimed at making healthcare policy easy to understand. Thanks to you, WPC has thwarted government union efforts to restrict information concerning public employee First Amendment Janus rights and have directly informed tens of thousands of workers around the state with statewide radio and digital efforts in English and Spanish.
Cheers to all of you who helped make great things happen in our state. As someone who spent more than my share of time in our state's capital, I can tell you that the progress achieved and described here did not come easy. Thank you. We need people dedicated to preserving our liberties and promoting good policy. We need Washington Policy Center. Now, here to share with you how the work of Washington Policy Center is essential for improving and protecting our state and how you can be part of it is board member and event co-chair, managing director of Madrona Venture Group in Seattle, Matt McElwain.
My name is Matt McElwain, and I serve on Washington Policy Center's board of directors. My wife Carol and I are honored to co-chair this year's annual dinner, and we want to thank you for joining us tonight in this virtual format. As you know, Washington Policy Center is an independent, nonprofit organization that relies on the support of people like you and me to fight for what we believe in. Tonight, I encourage you to invest in one of the most impactful organizations in our state. During these challenging and unsettling times, the work of WPC is more important than ever. The combination of pandemic, quarantine, economic disruption, and civil unrest are testing the boundaries of our society. People were required to stay home, businesses were forced to close, and now are struggling to open. And governments at all levels in our nation have sometimes intervened in society in unprecedented ways. And other times, they've not engaged to do their basic job. One thing we know from history is that when governments assert too much power, it's exceedingly difficult to cut it back. Thus, these are times when an informed and engaged citizenry is most important. Washington Policy Center is your voice for free market solutions in Washington State. Our research helps people of all ages and perspectives understand how free markets help destroy societal problems like disease, hunger, lack of opportunity, and even climate change by creating disruptive and innovative solutions. You're here tonight to support free market ideas and free market solutions. You know that failed government policy, a tax structure that discourages talent, investment, and risk-taking, and burdensome regulation translates into less opportunity, employment, and reduced prosperity for all. Washington Policy Center is a proven, powerful advocate for the kinds of solutions we need in order to inspire innovation and success in this state. We are prepared with the facts and stories to counter misguided and outdated policies. As you just heard from our research directors, our track record is unmatched. Thanks to Washington Policy Center and supporters like you, our state is income tax free, and we're fighting to keep it that way. Families across our state in this important time have the choice to send their children to charter schools, and there's numerous policies and reforms that we've helped pass into law by lawmakers and voters. But we can't operate without the support of individuals like you. Please, take a moment to pull out your phone. You should have received a text message with an opportunity to make a 100% tax-deductible donation to WPC tonight. You can follow that texted link or visit our dinner website on the screen right now. I encourage you to support WPC tonight with a donation of $50, $100, $1,000, $10,000, or even more. Our annual dinner each year brings in a third of our $4 million operating budget. We decided to make this event free so that people all over the state and region can join us to celebrate free market ideas. Your support tonight will make sure our team continues to work for what you and I believe in. Join the fight for free markets and free market solutions, because we all know free markets create.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you to all of our generous supporters. I was also just told that we have received a generous matching donation. So the first $25,000 that is donated tonight will be matched dollar for dollar. So your contribution will have double the impact. Thank you so much for that generous matching offer. We are now ready to welcome our second keynote speaker of the evening. Trey Gowdy served first as a federal prosecutor and then as congressman from South Carolina for 4 terms. While in Congress, he was widely known for his legal acumen, and he chaired the House Select Committee on events surrounding the 2012 terrorist attack in Benghazi. Congressman Gowdy has been a frequent Fox News contributor. He is the author of the New York Times bestsellers, Doesn't Hurt to Ask, and Unified, How Our Unlikely Friendship Gives Us Hope for a Divided Country, which he wrote with Senator Tim Scott. Please join me in welcoming to the stage our keynote speaker of the evening, Congressman Trey Gowdy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Washington Policy Center for inviting me to your beautiful state. It's been great to be with Governor Rick Perry, also to be with Victor Davis Hanson. I'm a little bit intimidated following him. If I heard correctly, he's written 24 books, which is more books than I have read. So I'm going to do my best to follow up. Several of you have asked about the transition from public life back to private life, and then several of you have been kind enough to ask about my family back in South Carolina. I'm going to give you a quick update on both, and then I want to talk to you about something that's weighing heavy on my heart. Leaving politics has been liberating, not just for me, but also for my family. I live with a 23-year-old Democratic Socialist. That would be our daughter and not my wife, if you are wondering. But our daughter no longer has to apologize to her comrades, as she calls them, friends as I call them, for her father's crazy political beliefs and votes in Congress. Our son majored in philosophy at Clemson University, and so then he had the same choice that all philosophy undergraduate majors have, which is, do I go to work at the Bojangles drive-thru or do I go to law school? And he opted to go to law school. And so my wife and I are in Virginia. He's about to walk across the stage and take the diploma out of the hand of the dean of the law school, and our son has an epiphany. that he doesn't want to be a lawyer. You may be wondering the same thing I was wondering, which is why could you not have had that epiphany 3 years and $150,000 ago, but nonetheless he did not. So we have a philosophy undergraduate major with a law degree son who is doing what all philosophy undergraduate majors who don't want to practice law do, which is live at home and play golf on his father's country club membership. Speaking of which, and I'm going to digress for just 1 second, I think it was around Christmas of 2019. I've got 6 jobs. I've practiced law. I've got a couple of podcasts, a little bit of television, wrote a book, teach a class at a local college. So I'm coming in, it's dark, can't get my key in the door. Of course, my wife has the house locked up like we live in Medellin, Colombia, or Chicago, Illinois. It's locked up. And I can see my son's in the room. He's doing something. I can't get the door open, and I just drop everything that's in my hands, and I'm exasperated. So I get the key in, and I turn it. Now, I don't even say a word. I just look at him. Don't even say a word. Well, my wife comes in and says, "Can I see you in the back?" She said, "You have no idea the amount of stress that our son is under." You're right, honey. I have absolutely no idea how much stress he could possibly be under. He has no mortgage, he has no car payment, he doesn't pay the bill. And she said, "Well, his man died on the video game this afternoon and he had to start all over again." So aside from a lack of objectivity as it relates to her children, my wife is a first grade school teacher. She is the kindest, most Christ-like, sweetest person on the face of the earth, with only one flaw that I'm aware of. She doesn't follow politics, doesn't watch cable news, doesn't read the paper. I'm not 100% sure she knows where I was for those 8 years, but she is hopelessly devoted to her first grade students and our 3 dogs. But the only weakness she has is she watches something called the Hallmark Channel. Every night, sits down for an hour and watches the exact same movie every single night. Perfect man meets a perfect woman, overcomes an incredibly minor obstacle in life, and then lives happily ever after. That's my family. Do I miss it? I miss the people. I've been asked that question several times. I mean, I say I miss the people. It's hard to miss people that won't quit calling or leave you alone, but I do miss some of the people I served with. Maybe, 8 months ago, 10 months ago, when our country was on the verge of war with Norway or Iceland or Denmark over Greenland. Y'all remember when that was in the public consciousness? We were going to buy Greenland, and then we were all worried about our relationship with these other countries. And I was nervous. I was mainly nervous that somebody was going to ask me to find Iceland or Norway or Denmark on a map. But I went to bed that night and had a terrible dream, which right before we get to the heart of the business, I want to share that dream with you. And you can trust me, this really happened. I'm a lawyer, you can trust me. In my dream, John Boehner, Marco Rubio, and Lindsey Graham all were tragically struck by lightning at a strip mall in Georgia where they were taking a hot yoga class. And they passed away and they went to heaven and they were greeted by St. Peter, and St. Peter said, "Hey, look, I know you were big shots on earth, but this is heaven and there are rules in heaven, and you're going to follow the rules or there are going to be consequences." John Boehner was the first person to violate the rules in heaven. He broke into a CVS and stole some cigarettes and some self-tanning lotion. And in my dream, he was chained to Rosie O'Donnell with a 10-foot-long chain and a voice as loud as thunder. I heard, "John Boehner, you have violated the rules of heaven, and this is your punishment for all of eternity." And then I saw Marco Rubio, and Marco had broken into Mary Magdalene's apartment and stole those high-heel boots he wore in the Iowa caucuses to make himself look taller. And then on the way out of her apartment, he stole some San Pellegrino sparkling water in case he's ever asked to give the response to the State of the Union again. Come on, you remember that. You remember the water incident. In any event, he is chained to Gavin Newsom with a 5-foot-long chain and a voice as loud as thunder. I hear, "Marco Rubio, you have violated the rules of heaven, and this is your punishment for all of eternity." And this is where I get emotional because I've known Lindsey Graham for 25 years now. But in my dream, he is chained to the former supermodel Cindy Crawford with a 3-foot-long chain. And in a voice as loud as thunder, I hear, "Cindy Crawford, you have violated the rules of heaven, and this is your punishment for all of eternity." So for those of you who wonder whether or not I want to be a federal judge, he's the chairman of the committee that decides who becomes federal judges. So as of about 30 seconds ago, no, I will not be a federal judge. Where are we? When I got to Congress, we had the House, but we didn't have the Senate, we didn't have the White House. So our message to the American people was, we need the Senate. Give us the Senate. Because if we have the Senate, we can pass bills in the House, we can pass bills in the Senate, we can send them to President Obama's desk, we can force him to veto those bills, and that will set up the contrast that you have to have in politics, that contrast that we're all looking for, where you can pick between one party and another. So we need the Senate. We got the House, give us the Senate. I distinctly remember being on stage with Tim Scott in North Carolina, campaigning for Tom Tillis. Never once did we say we need 60 votes. Never once did we say, you know, there are a lot of factions within the Republican Party. We're going to have a hard time getting along with each other if we ever are in power. We said, give us the Senate. And the American people did. They rewarded us with the Senate. So we had the House and the Senate, but what we really, really needed was the White House. And that was the argument we made. We have the House, we have the Senate, but we need the White House. That's what we need to be able to effectuate our agenda. And in 2016, the American people said, we're going to give you the House, the Senate, and the White House. We had everything we needed, everything that you need to govern, everything except a set of deeply held convictions that you govern from, everything except a legislative agenda. Everything except a set of deeply held precepts. You know, conservatism is not an electoral strategy. It's bigger than that. It's a set of ideals that you are willing to stick with, even if you suffer short-term loss. Conservatism is a set of deeply held precepts. It's an orthodoxy. It is much more than an electoral strategy. Sure, a natural and probable consequence could be that you win elections, but it is bigger than that. Populism is an electoral strategy. You go hire a good pollster, you find out what people believe, and then you repeat it back to them, and it is a magnificent electoral strategy. But conservatism is not. Conservatism is a set of deeply held beliefs. It's a belief structure that should sustain you through the vagaries of political cycles. Populism may tell you what you want to hear. Conservatism tells you respectfully and persuasively what you ought to hear, what you need to hear. We have lost 6 out of the last, and when I say we, I mean Republicans have lost 6 out of the last 7 popular votes for president. We had the House, we lost it. The Senate's at stake this fall. The White House is at stake this fall. I want to build something that lasts. I want to build something that is more powerful than just an election cycle. I want to build something, and it has to be rooted in a set of deeply held convictions and beliefs, but that's what I want to build. So how do we do it? How do we build a political movement that is not subject to the vagaries of election cycles? First thing I want to ask you is, what do you believe? What do you really believe? Do you believe in a limited federal government? Can you tell people why you believe that? In this environment where we increasingly look to government to solve an increasing number of our problems, do you believe in a limited federal government? And can you explain to others why you believe it? Can you explain why something could be a magnificent idea? It's just not a magnificent federal idea. I'll give you 2 examples. Tort reform. Most conservatives I know believe in tort reform. Do you think that's a federal issue? If you're on the floor of the House and they bring up a bill, as tempting as it may be, that seeks to impact the civil justice systems in the 50 states, is that a federal issue? Do you want Congress telling the state of Washington or the state of Idaho or the state of South Carolina what its civil justice system should look like? So something can be a really good idea, it's just not a good federal idea. Can you explain the difference? Domestic violence. I spent 16 years prosecuting domestic violence cases. I will take a backseat to precisely no one when it comes to standing up for women. No one. Can you make the argument to the head of your local domestic violence center, your local rape crisis center, can you make the argument that yes, it should be the preeminent function but of the state of South Carolina, not the Congress of the United States? What do you believe and why do you believe it? You believe in a limited federal government? Do you believe in free markets? That's a tough issue now. Do you believe in free markets? I come from a state that has a little tiny employer named Boeing. You may too. Boeing avails itself of something called the Exim Bank. Airbus, which is Boeing's largest competitor, has access to 3 Exim banks in France. In this political environment with talk of tariffs and fair trade and level playing fields, can you make the argument that you still believe in free markets? What do you believe and why do you believe it? Do you believe in personal responsibility? Why? Can you make the argument that for every right you have, there is a corresponding responsibility to exercise that right responsibly? The right to free speech, we're all glad we have that. Can you make the argument that also comes with it, the responsibility to not tell lies? Do you believe in the right to keep and bear arms? Can you make the argument that with that comes the responsibility to use that firearm reasonably and legally? The right to vote. Can you make the argument that yes, I'm glad we have the right to vote, but with that comes the responsibility that you educate yourself before you exercise that right? Do you believe in this notion of a shared accountability towards one another, that's one thing we owe each other as fellow citizens, is this shared sense of citizenry, that no, I'm not going to take advantage of a government program. I'm not going to avail myself of something I'm not entitled to. In other words, do you reject relativism? Is that one of the precepts upon which you think conservatism is founded? Education. Can you make the argument that conservatives believe that education is the closest thing to magic that we will ever have in our culture? That it is literally the pathway to changing generations of lives, education. But can you make the argument that those education decisions are best made at the state and local level and not in Washington? Can you make the argument? Do you believe it, and can you make the argument? Do you believe in the inherent or the intrinsic value of work? Do you believe in respect for the rule of law? That's something that's being widely debated in our country right now. Public safety, respect for the rule of law. Can you make the argument that the law is the most unifying, equalizing force that we have in our culture? That there's a reason it's personified by a blindfolded woman holding a set of scales? It's the only thing that makes the richest person in Washington State drive the same speed limit as the poorest person in Washington State. Can you make the argument that respect for the rule of law is a foundation of our republic? And that when we say respect for the rule of law, that's just not code for lock more people up? That it's broader than that, it's bigger than that, it's a foundation of our democracy? What do you believe? And why do you believe it? I used to like Supreme Court nomination hearings. I don't consider myself to be a nerd, but I used to like them. I used to like watching them. All the way back to Bork. I like smart people questioning other smart people about their judicial philosophy. If it's minimalism, if it's activism, originalism, I like it. I like listening to it. And then along came the Kavanaugh hearing. I heard things thought I'd never hear in this country. I heard senators say that they believed one witness over another witness before the witness had even opened his or her mouth. So I want you to tell a 16-year prosecutor how you can possibly make a credibility assessment before either person has spoken. How can you possibly do that? How can you say you believe this person over that person when neither person has said a word? I heard a United States senator say it was someone's responsibility to prove his innocence. Do you ever think you would hear that in this country, much less from a U.S. senator, that it was someone's responsibility to prove his innocence? Why do you think there is a presumption of innocence in this country? Because you cannot prove your innocence. That's why. I heard a senator say that men needed to sit down and shut up. Is that what you want to say to half of our country on an issue like domestic violence or sexual assault? You want to tell half the country to sit down and shut up? Like there's never been a man that dedicated his life to standing up for women who have been assaulted or victimized? Due process. That's a precept of conservatism, isn't it? You believe in due process? And this is the surest sign that you can tell I'm never running for office again. Because I may say something that offends you, but I believe it. I believe it to my core. One precept of conservatism is that we treat friend and foe alike. Same rules of fairness. We believe in fundamental fairness. So if we think our folks are entitled to due process, so too are folks on the other side, which is why I do not think it is a conservative precept for us to ever chant, lock him up or lock her up. The only time we lock people up in this culture is after they've been indicted and a jury of their peers, beyond a reasonable doubt, has found them guilty of every element of a crime. That's when we lock people up, not based on the catatonic chants of a crowd. What do you believe? And I keep harking on why you believe it. And you may wonder, why does he keep using the word why? Because people are wired to know why. I never had to prove to any jury why someone killed another person. Never had to prove why they robbed the bank. Never had to prove why they sold narcotics. It's not an element of any offense why someone did it. But you better believe it is the first thing the jury wants to know. Why? We're wired to want to know why. Can you explain to people not only what you believe, but why you believe it? And how you arrived at that conclusion, and how you considered alternatives to that conclusion, but you rejected them. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? That's number one. The second thing I think we need to address if we want to build a sustainable political movement is the manner in which we communicate. I had to stand in front of 12 people that I had no relationship with, that couldn't get out of jury service. And let's be honest, that's the only people that sit on juries are people that couldn't get out of jury service. But I couldn't know them. I mean, if I knew them, they wouldn't be on the jury. So you have 12 strangers, and you have to convince them beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest evidentiary burden we have in our culture, and you have to convince all 12. How do you do it? Persuasion, facts, authenticity, a relationship, candor. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? How do you communicate? What works? You want to be persuasive? What works? Facts, authenticity, sincerity, a relationship. What doesn't work? Hypocrisy doesn't work. Telling people to live by a separate set of rules from the ones you're willing to live by. Insults don't work. They're great at ratifying or validating what people already believe, but if you've lost 6 out of the last 7 races for president, you better be in the business of persuasion. And persuasion is not accomplished by insults. What else works? Hope works. You know, that word was used during a presidential campaign. President Obama used that, Road to Victory, 2008. But it's still a word. That word does not belong to the Democrat Party. I was sitting at home, I guess about 12 months ago, and my wife made me go to a wedding with her. That may not be the right way to phrase it. My wife and I went to a wedding together last fall. If you want me to go to your wedding, you shouldn't get married in the fall or on a Saturday. Mondays are better for me than Saturdays, but nonetheless, she said, get your behind in the truck, you're going to your sister's wedding. So I went, and it's the same verse you hear at every wedding. You can't possibly go to a wedding without hearing, these three things remain, faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. We all know that. But did you ever stop and think how powerful hope must be to even be in the same sentence with love? Do you speak in hopeful terms? The people you're trying to persuade, are they convinced that you want what is best for them, that you understand their goals and their aspirations and their hopes in life? Do you speak in hopeful terms? You know, you've heard Tim Scott's name several times. He was my best friend when I was in Congress. He will preach my funeral whenever that day comes. He's more than a colleague. He's more like a family member. We were having dinner several years ago in Washington, and we were kind of recalling growing up in South Carolina. Tim said his grandfather would hold up the newspaper at the breakfast table in Charleston. Wanted his grandson to appreciate current events and the value of education. You got to know what's going on in the world, son. You got to be aware. You got to be educated. So Tim was telling me how his grandfather would hold the newspaper up, modeling for that young, impressionable Tim Scott. You got to educate yourself, son. Got to know what's going on in the world. Got to be knowledgeable. And I laughed and said, you know, we got that in common too, Tim. My dad did the same thing in Spartanburg. Different paper, different breakfast table, but we got that in common too. He did the same thing. And then Tim hung his head and said, the difference, Trey, is that my grandfather couldn't read. He died at the age of 94, not being able to read. He faked it. He faked it because he wanted his grandson to understand that the ceiling was higher than picking cotton. And that grandfather who picked cotton wound up having a grandson that picked out a seat in the United States House of Representatives, and then later the United States Senate. That's the power of hope. Do you communicate hope with the people you are seeking to persuade? So what do you believe? Why do you believe it? Do you communicate in hopeful terms? And this is what we need in conclusion. Who's going to deliver that message? Who's the messenger? I flew into a city named for Washington, into an airport named for Reagan. And the pilot that took me from the Carolinas to Washington always took the same route. And out of the left-hand side of that airplane, you would just become mesmerized by the history and the fame out the left-hand side of the window. And every building is named for someone, and every street is named for someone famous. And then you get to Capitol Hill, and the House office buildings and the Senate office buildings are all named for famous people, and even the rooms within those buildings. And you just become overwhelmed with this sense of your own inadequacy, that you're never going to be one of those famous names. And then you figure out that there's another side to that airplane that you're flying on, and there's another window. And you look out the right-hand side of the window and you see these gently rolling hills punctuated by elegant white crosses. It is so tragically beautiful and anonymous from the sky. And so my question to you is, who do you think really built this country? Who did we call upon when the country was in danger, who founded it, who perfected it, who's in the process of perfecting it, who defended it? Is it the names you know? Or those men and women buried at that tragically beautiful place called Arlington, whose names you do not know? There's a temptation we have to wait on other people to do something. If only the governor would do this, if only the Supreme Court would do that, if only the mayor, if only my representative. There's a temptation to wait on others to do what we think ought to be done. The messenger is you. I'm not asking you to do what the people on the right-hand side of that plane did. I'm not asking you to find something to die for. I will ask you to find something to live for and to sacrifice for and to be the change that you want to see in your community and in your state and in your country. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? Do you communicate in hopeful, aspirational tones? And are you willing to be the change in your own sphere of influence that you want to see effectuated and accomplished in our country? God bless you, and thank you for letting me be with you this evening.
Thank you, Trey Gowdy. What an inspirational message, powerful message for all of us at Washington Policy Center, all of our supporters. Thank you for delivering it. Well, what a great evening. I want to thank everyone who was involved tonight. I want to thank our staff. I want to thank this great production crew here at our studio in Seattle. And I want to thank everyone who made this event such a success. All of our speakers, Melanie Stambaugh, our MC, thank you for being with us this evening. And everyone, we wish we could have been together, of course, in person in Bellevue and then in 2 weeks in Spokane. We all wanted to be, not here virtually, but we wanted all to be together. But we were so pleased by the response to the virtual format and to everyone's support. And what a program, thanks to our amazing speakers. A special thank you goes out to our dinner committee of our board, Matt and Carol McElwain for chairing this year's event. As Matt mentioned earlier, this evening, our annual dinner brings in 1/3 of our revenue each year and is so critical to ensure our impact continues across the state. The numbers are coming in thanks to your support. We have already maximized the very generous match. We have raised a total of $1.4 million, which is amazing for this year's annual dinner. Even with that, we still only have $100,000 left to raise to reach our goal of $1.5 million. So if you haven't already, please go to the link on your screen and make a 100% tax-deductible donation to support us tonight. Your support is critical and very much appreciated. Thanks to all of you, Trey Gowdy, Greg Porter, Mark Pinkowski, Dr. Hansen. Without the support of our valued donors and our sponsors tonight, we would not be able to do the important work you have heard about tonight, and will be continuing throughout the year and during the 2021 legislative session. And as promised, we are excited to announce that we already have dates for next year's events. And believe me, next year we will be in person at the Bellevue Hyatt on October 1st and the Davenport Grand in Spokane on October 15th. When we can all be together again and celebrate Kemper and George in person. And we will also plan to continue to bring a virtual option to people across the state like we did tonight. Be sure to join Washington Policy Center as a member to be the first to know when our registration for next year's events goes live. It's the best way to stay in touch with our events and what's happening in Washington State. So thank you again, Melanie. Thanks for being here tonight, and thanks for spending your birthday with us. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Dan. I could not imagine a better way to spend my birthday than being with free market supporters and with an organization that I really believe in so deeply. So thank you for having me. It has been a pleasure to host tonight, and we look forward to next year when we can meet in person. If you've enjoyed this evening, I hope that you will look for the video clips on Washington Policy Center's website and social pages and share them with your friends. We know that we need as many free market supporters as we can get. Now, don't forget about our post-event parties that are coming up immediately following this on Zoom. Thank you all for attending, and I look forward to seeing you next year in Bellevue or in Spokane, and virtually from all over the country. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.